Dedicated to the survival of American democracy in an increasingly dangerous world, this is Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, acted as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy under President Ronald Reagan, founder of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., the go-to man for defense and foreign policy issues, joined by the greatest minds in the security policy business, the special forces in the war of ideas at Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. We're going to talk with a man who has been in the fight for a long time, now is running a new PAC entitled the Decouple China Political Action Committee, but he draws on experience on Capitol Hill and running as a candidate for the United States Congress and working in political campaigns, notably the Reagan-Bush campaign. We're very pleased to have Paul Boardman with us. Paul, welcome aboard for the first time, I think, to Secure Freedom Radio. Good to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure.
Let me ask you about why you believe the United States must decouple from China and what you mean by that phrase.
Well, I mean 100% decoupling. We need to rebuild America, and I believe that's the way to do that. It really started for me all the way back in 1996 when I was running for Congress and had a conversation with Sonny Bono, who said the Chinese were playing a cat and mouse game with us and we shouldn't be joining the WTO. And subsequently, the MO of the CCP has become clear. We're starting to see that. We have seen it. And when the pandemic hit, that was really it for me in terms of saying, all right, I think we can see clearly what's happening here in the threat, what the hybrid threat is. And
so we're talking about a dangerous adversary with whom we have developed over the years, with the strong support of successive U.S. governments, Republican as well as Democrat, I'm sorry to say, a host of relationships, coupling our economy, coupling all kinds of other international relationships in the UN and the Paris Climate Change Accord and so on. And when you say decouple, do you mean literally severing all of those ties, commercial and institutional?
I do. I feel very comfortable with that, going back to 1979 and the agreements with Jimmy Carter and China. Technology transfers, cultural transfers. We've been embedded with China since then. And of course, President Trump has done a tremendous job in pushing back on that and starting the process of decoupling. And
fundamentally, the point is that these guys do want to destroy us. So whatever coupling we are doing, whatever help we're giving them simply advances their ability to do that. So when we discuss this topic, the Chamber of Commerce of the United States is rolled out, and it says, this is going to cost a lot of money. This is going to be very dislocating for a lot of American businesses and Wall Street and so on. What's your response to that, Paul Boardman?
Well, our trade deficit with China in 2020 was $310 billion. That is 1 million businesses doing $310,000 in sales per year. I don't see that as a problem that our economy cannot absorb and step into that marketplace.
So the choice is we might indeed suffer some economic dislocation, perhaps, but that the strategic imperative is so great. Particularly, I think, Paul, you mentioned, the wake-up call that a lot of Americans got, not just yourself, with the what I call CCP virus. But in particular, what it showcased was our dependency on China for critical supply chains, notably, among other things, medicines, for heaven's sake. How fast do you think we could replicate or replace those supply chains, either here in the United States, ideally, onshoring as it's called, or elsewhere around the world?
Well, I just don't buy the argument that we can't do anything, and I believe in the ingenuity of the American people, and we can move quickly to make anything happen, and we did do that, and the President did that with his Defense Production Acts. I was an advocate in April to take a look at those Defense Production Acts and increase them to the actual industries that China has pilfered from us over the last decades, and go ahead and bring those industries back, put some incentives in, put money to it, and just start making those products in America. It's really an integration problem of technology and capabilities with people and talent, and we need to put some money to it. I believe strongly that we could have flipped this economy quickly back to some more manufacturing.
That certainly was President Trump's attitude as well. It doesn't seem to be so much that of the Biden administration. In fact, of course, we've just had this spectacle, I talk about it in my commentary today, of the administration saying that the Chinese Communist Party did engage in genocide. One of the reasons why we would not want to be doing business with them, of course. But it's not clear whether they are doing it now. And the only thing that seems to change in all of that is that Joe Biden talked for 2 hours to Xi Jinping. Not clear what was said. In fact, I think we need a transcript of what was said to make sure we do understand what transpired. But he came out of that saying publicly that, China just has different cultural norms than we do. And therefore, evidently, this genocide isn't a genocide anymore. How does that kind of thinking factor into what you're doing, Paul, with your Decouple China PAC? It obviously makes it more challenging if the U.S. government is seemingly opposed to what you're about, but it also seemingly would make it vastly more important that you do what you're doing.
Well, Mainstreet gets it. Mainstreet gets it. I'm a liaison to Mainstreet American voters, and I believe they believe that genocide has been taking place. So I think Biden can say what he wants to say. Obviously, it doesn't feel like he wants to step up and face the challenge, and not capable of doing so. My job is to do the best I can to coordinate and coalition the American people and bring their voices to bear to decouple China and rebuild America. There are several coalitions, I think, here at play. I believe the military, U.S. military, is behind decoupling. I believe Mainstreet, the American people are. Wall Street and so forth, not. But the job of that you're doing, and the committee on the present danger of China is building an incredible coalition, doing a great job to reach out across the bipartisan policy spectrum in Washington.
It is interesting. While the administration is not so much of this mind, it does seem as though members of Congress, in the Senate as well as the House, both sides of the aisle are increasingly aligned with what you're talking about. Very quickly, we've got less than a minute left. Paul Boardman, how can people learn more about what you do and help?
Well, Decouple China PAC at decouplecchina.org. We're seeing some tremendous leaders step up, and seeing so many on your program, from Gordon Chang and just in the last few days, and Dr. Bessett. And I look to Congressman Perry, Pennsylvania 10. He's emerged as, I think, a tremendous leader. He is advocating boycotting, and he's doing that publicly, as well as his HR 8491, designating the Chinese Communist Party as a transnational crime organization. I think that's very telling that their MO seems to be more criminal as opposed to nation state. And I think that may be the disconnect between Mainstreet and more of the Congress.
We have to leave it at that. Paul Boardman, we're hard out of time. Thank you for yours today, and thank you for the work you're doing at decouplecchina.org. Keep it up. Come back to us with updates, if you would, very soon. Next up, we'll speak with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, one of our country's most distinguished military officers, about the state of the military and what it means for you right after this.
Visit us at facebook.com/securefreedom with Frank Gaffney. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back, and a particularly heartfelt welcome back to our next guest. He is one of the men I admire most, and I think for good reason. We all should. His name is Lieutenant General William Jerry Boykin, United States Army retired, a retirement that followed on to decades of extraordinary service to our country and the Army of the United States, the uniform of the United States Army, but also in most of its most storied special operations units and those of the military more generally. He also served in a number of capacities in connection with U.S. intelligence operations, finishing up his distinguished career as the Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence in the Defense Department. He is these days the Executive Vice President of a wonderful organization, the Family Research Council, an author and leader of the conservative movement in America. It's great to have you back, General. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to join us.
Frank, it's always a privilege to be on your program. You do a lot towards informing our public, and so I'm glad to be part of that.
Thank you. Thank you for you doing that. I'd like to start by asking you to give us a stock taking based on your long experience in the military and what you're seeing happening now in it about the state of our armed forces. In particular, I'm thinking about both its preparedness to do the job that we expect it to do in terms of dealing with foreign adversaries, but also what's being done to it by an administration that seems to think it's rife with domestic terrorists or other unsavory sorts.
Well, love him or hate him, President Donald Trump really came in and I think did essentially what Ronald Reagan did when he came in behind Jimmy Carter. He began to restore our military in terms of its funding, its materiel, and its priority. And I think that's exactly what Donald Trump did. And I think that today our military is in a state of confusion and apprehension. One of the first things that Donald Trump did was he barred transgenders from the military. Well, that was a message. It had more importance in terms of the message it sent to the men and women that serve in the military. And the message was, we are about war fighting. We're about your primary mission, winning the nation's wars, and all this other stuff. If it doesn't contribute to winning the nation's wars, get rid of it. And that's essentially what he was doing. Now, how long did it take him to run ISIS out of Iraq? Less than a year? That was because he changed the rules of engagement. So I think that there's apprehension right now. There's a state of confusion. And I think thus far the signals and the messages that have been sent to our military have been very confusing at best and damaging more likely.
Yeah. And to your point, General, one of the first things that Joe Biden did, of course, was reestablish that transgender individuals can serve in the United States Armed Forces, can have full medical treatments and so on at the public expense, to pursue their gender identity transformation and so on. And it does seem as though that is not only not essential to the warfighting capabilities of the United States, but probably actually detrimental to them. And it is of a piece with sort of more generally what seems to be going on. But I would like to ask you about this question of Lloyd Austin, another distinguished four-star Army officer, now the Secretary of Defense, though Joe Biden seemingly couldn't remember that was the case or who he was. There is, on his part, it seems, presumably at the behest of the White House, a very concerted effort underway to try to purge the military of people who seemingly have as their only offense that they have supported, Donald Trump in the past.
Yeah, I mean, this is not just disturbing. This is scary. You've always been banned in the military from being a part of or associated with any kind of extremist group, the Ku Klux Klan or the Aryan Nations or street gangs and that type of thing. So that we've always had a prohibition on that. But now it is coming down to who you voted for. I mean, they won't say it in those words, but that's what it's really coming down to is, you're wearing a MAGA cap. Well, that puts you in the category of being an extremist. Or you're wearing a flag on your civilian clothes somewhere, that even raises you to the level of at least getting a second look in terms of where you stand on things. And this is very frightening because this is not what our founding fathers intended for this nation. I mean, and this is what they feared, as a matter of fact, is going after people, turning the government resources against people because they supported another party or another theology or whatever it may be. This is very frightening, and I got to tell you, the recruiting in our military is going to suffer. All branches of the military are going to suffer if this is what we're going to continue doing. They've got to stop this.
And unfortunately, as you know, General, when that happens, typically the response is, well, you lower the standards. You go get warm bodies in, even if they're not the best that you could hope for and need. And this brings me to 2 points, General, that are related. One is the identification of not just those in uniform, but people throughout the country as domestic terrorists or insurrectionists, or at least people who must be regarded with suspicion. Point one, because of their political affiliations and support, in particular for Donald Trump. But point two, that there's a kind of weaponization, it seems, underway, to some extent, as we've talked about, of the military, but also the intelligence community in which you served for many years, and law enforcement, for that matter. This is clearly not what the founders had in mind either, but what are the implications of that if it isn't corrected?
Well, I think we've already seen where that leads with this, the way the CIA and much of the intelligence community, as well as the DOD, as well as the DOJ, went after Donald Trump. Claiming that he was an illegitimate president. And where did it go? Nowhere. It turned up to be nothing. But that didn't stop the bad publicity from every mainstream news outlet and placing questions in the minds of people. But now, when we've got young men and women that are coming into a military that wants to make sure that they have the right ideology, the right theology, or whatever you want to call it, the right political persuasion in order for them to, A, come in, but more importantly, to be promoted, to be moved into positions of real authority, at the senior levels, and both the enlisted as well as the officer levels. That is not what this military is about. It's never been about that. And if we are going to start that, our military is going to come apart, because you're not going to have any independent thought whatsoever by our military. And look, I came out of special operations. You win. You overcome your adversary based largely on the creativity and the flexibility and the agility of the men that you have out there fighting. And when you have this kind of thing starting to unfold in our system, where everybody has to think alike, they have to think alike politically, they have to think alike socially, they have to support certain things like the whole LGBT agenda, then that is very, very dangerous to our military, because our military, if you go back and look at the people that were awarded medals of honor and that type of thing, you'll see that they were independent thinkers. They rose to the occasion, and it wasn't something that somebody told them to do. It was something they did on their own because they were independent thinkers, and they saw what was going on, and they reacted to it.
And needless to say, those concerns are also, I believe, stated for what would happen if our intelligence agencies, despite statutory limits on their engagement internally in our country, were to be used to go after these political opponents, as well as, of course, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. So, General, let me turn to one other piece of this. You've spent much of your career fighting jihadists, terrorists who do it at the direction of this ideological, doctrine of Islam called Sharia. The mullahs of Iran are prime movers behind that. Just very quickly, is there any question in your mind that what the Biden team is doing to try to romance those mullahs again, including, taking the Houthi terrorists off their terrorism list, is fraught with peril.
It is fraught with peril. And look, Frank, in 1978, when I came into this counter-terror business, when we stood up the Delta Force, I didn't even know what an Islamic terrorist was. So we were forced to study this. And I have maintained, as you well know, largely through your organization, I've maintained a focus on this. And what people need to understand is that the president of Iran is not in charge of Iran. It is the Supreme Council. It is the mullahs. It is the spiritual leaders of Iran and Shia Islam that are in charge. All you have to do is read the Quran. And don't buy into this nonsense that you can't understand the Quran if you don't speak Arabic, because, by the way, the Iranians speak Farsi for the most part. So all you have to do is read an English translation of the Quran, and you will see in there that they are compelled to do certain things, and jihad is fundamental to who they are, and we cannot make excuses for them.
We have to leave that for the moment, General. I hope you'll come back soon and join us also on our television program in the near future, if you would, Securing America. We appreciate your service to our country, sir, both in the past in uniform and that you are continuing to render these days at the Family Research Council. I know you'll keep it up, and I'll look forward to our next visit. Next up, we'll speak with former Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra, about these issues and more. Straight ahead.
Now more with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back, and I couldn't be more pleased to have a friend and much admired colleague of now many years with us, not only on this program, but with us as the new chairman of the Center for Security Policy's Advisory Board. His name is Ambassador Pete Hoekstra. He served as our representative the United States in the Netherlands, a land from which he originally hailed. He also served with great distinction in the United States Congress, among other things, as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And we're extremely pleased that he is bringing all of those talents and experiences to bear in continuing service to our country now in this role with the Center for Security Policy. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio. It's so good to have you.
Hey, Frank, it is always good to be with you and talk about, the topics of the day that have such implications long-term for the future of the country. So great to be with you.
Indeed. Thank you. And listen, you've been as clear-eyed about many of these as anybody, and I wanted to hearken back to something you wrote about in foxnews.com back in February, namely a sort of variation on the theme that I was just discussing with General Boykin. The concern you have, and I certainly share, and he does as well, that the intelligence capabilities of this country at the moment seem to be being brought to bear against Americans here in the United States. You understand the limitations on such conduct and the implications should those statutory restrictions be ignored. Talk us through what seems to be going on in this regard, Mr. Ambassador, and what, again, it might portend.
Yeah, well, I mean, this goes all the way back to 2016, just before and right after the presidential election. It appears, and there's, plenty of evidence that parts of the executive branch, parts of the Obama administration were liberally using the intelligence community to spy or at least monitor the Trump campaign and the Trump transition. We saw that in the prosecution of Michael Flynn. We saw that in what they call unmasking. We have very, very strict rules in the intelligence community. I mean, our intelligence community is basically a vacuum cleaner. If there's communications and electronic information, flowing around the world outside of the United States, there's a good chance we are sucking it up. But there are very strict rules as to, that information that is collected when it involves an American. You just can't use that information and you can't reveal who you've collected on unless you meet some very, very strict requirements. And the FBI and others seem to have collected or gained access to that information and then used it in a number of ways. Effectively, what does that mean? What does that mean to the American citizen? It means our domestic law enforcement agencies were using information collected by the intelligence community to go after Americans. They can't do that, but they were. They were skirting the rules. They were going to this Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the FISA court, to get authorization to spy on Americans, to basically begin legal proceedings against Americans. And the information that they used was sketchy at best. And that's the fear is that has continued till has now restarted again. You've heard people like John Brennan say, the threat in America, it's these right-wing people, even libertarians, and implying that we should take all of our capabilities for law enforcement, information gathering, including the intelligence community, to make sure America is safe by spying on Americans.
Yeah, you had a quote from John Brennan, if I can just read this, because it really is so stunning in this article that you wrote for Fox News. You said he had opined on MSNBC that the Biden administration is, quote, now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, unquote. Now, John Brennan, of course, was very intimately involved in the kinds of abuses that you just described, Pete, and has seemingly skated on prosecution for any of that misconduct, at least so far. When he says that these movements internal to the United States, and I think he's talking basically about Trump voters, look a lot like the insurgencies overseas, it seems to play into this idea that they ought to be treated the same way. Some have suggested including drone strikes, for heaven's sakes. Is that indeed what is now afoot, this laser-like focus and real abuse of the intelligence community's capabilities?
Well, again, at this point in time, we don't know that, and it's going to be very, very hard for Congress to do oversight on this because someone like the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, would be complicit in this, and he would agree with the view of John Brennan about the threats that are focused on internally here in the United States, and that the Biden administration should be focused on them with a laser-like capability, a laser-like attitude. And remember, John Brennan, when he was director of the CIA, turned the CIA loose on the Senate Intelligence Committee and paid no price for it. Imagine that. The executive branch spying on the legislative branch. And John Brennan should have been removed from office, if not prosecuted, but was not. And then when you take a look at, as the Brennan quote goes on, he describes a group of people clearly. I don't know who they voted for, but clearly he's targeting the conservative right. And that becomes clear when he throws in the term libertarians. Think about it. You're a libertarian. You believe in a limited role of government. And the former director of the CIA and probably an advisor to the Biden administration sees you as an insurgent threat to the United States of America, and the government should be focused on you with a laser-like capability. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous.
The thing that makes it even more worrying, Congressman and Ambassador, is what they're not looking at. And we're watching the restart, it seems, of the same kinds of revolutionary activity that we witnessed over the summer, starting in Minneapolis, as it did last summer, in connection with this trial of the police officer accused of murdering George Floyd. Are you concerned that the intelligence community is not adequately, and law enforcement for that matter, the FBI, which is part of both communities, not adequately focused on groups like Black Lives Matter, the organization, and Antifa that have been implicated in, no kidding, domestic, I would argue, terrorism?
Yeah, my daughter lives not far from the courthouse in Minneapolis, and so she witnessed the riots last summer, the burning and the destruction that went on in downtown Minneapolis. And she will tell you, and we've seen pictures of this, that Minneapolis right now, they are prepared for it. It appears like they are prepared for the worst possible outcomes of this trial, with different layers of security, and in between these fences, they've got razor wire and those types of things. So they're prepared for that. But I think you're going to the deeper question is the tone that's being set by the administration and agencies, our law enforcement agencies, the FBI, the intelligence community. Sure, they take their lead and their direction from the president and his team, and so when they're talking about targeting, who they target and those types of things, it means that there are certain groups that are not targeted. And it is clear that, they are focused more on conservative folks right now than they are from organizations like Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and these organizations that over the last 12 to 18 months have demonstrated a willingness to use violence to achieve their political ends. And so, yes, I think that there's limited resources, but more importantly, when you're working in these organizations, and I saw it in the State Department, you can see what they want you to do and what they don't want you to do, and you follow that direction. Because for the career people in these agencies, if you go against the direction of the administration, whether it's the top of your organization or the executive branch, and the messaging coming out of the White House, bad things happen to you. You don't get promoted. You don't get the right performance reviews. And the other thing is you only have limited resources. Okay. So if you're focusing on what they want you to focus on, it inherently means that there are other threats that you're not taking a look at. And perhaps the most clear example of that is take a look at what's going on the border. The Customs and Border people, they're shutting down, they're shutting down some of the highway checkpoints because they're low on resources. And so, sure, it means there are certain things you will not do because people have told you to focus on something else.
Yeah, and dismantling ICE effectively is another example of, reducing resources that are needed for the fight where it matters. Congressman, we only have 10 seconds left. Any concerns about the mental acuity and fitness of Joe Biden at the moment?
I'm not an expert in that area, but let's get him out in front of the American people and start being accountable on a daily basis for the actions that his administration is taking.
Amen. Thank you, sir. God bless you. Great to have you aboard at the Center for Security Policy, Congressman and Ambassador Pete Hoekstra. Come back to us again next week if you would.
Hey, great. Thank you.
God bless. Next up, we will speak with Colonel John Mills. We'll take stock of what is happening with China at the moment that ought to be of concern to all of us. Be right back with more on that right after this.
Go to securefreedomradio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio. Go to securefreedomradio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio.
We're back, and I'm pleased to say we are joined by another distinguished veteran of the United States Army's Special Operations elements. His name is Colonel John Mills, United States Army retired. He served in uniform for several decades, doing psychological operations and the like for the Special Forces. He has also served in civilian capacities, notably as the former Director of Cyber Security Policy, Strategy, and International Affairs in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He is a frequent contributor at Epoch Times, an outstanding publication, and we're always delighted to have him with us, not least because of the contributions he makes to our Committee on the Present Danger China, of which he is a founding member. John Mills, it's so good to have you back. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Just an honor as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Listen, I'm interested in sort of your net assessment, if I could get it, about the state of the threat we are facing from communist China and the Chinese Communist Party, its military, the People's Liberation Army, its intelligence services, its cyber warfare operations, and not least its United Front Work Department, operating, among other places, here in the United States. So let's go through those sort of in turn quickly. John, we were told by the press spokesman of the State Department on Monday that the administration isn't sure that the Chinese are still engaged in genocide against part of their population out in Western China. What does that tell us about their situational awareness of how the Chinese are treating their own people, which I'm fond of saying is always a bit of a tell as to how they're likely to treat others, including ours?
Thank you, Frank. And I should have an article out today in Epoch Times. Will the real China policy of the Biden administration please stand up? I think there is internal confusion on what their policy is. That is not a good thing. That is always a bad thing when facing a stressed and pressured totalitarian regime. So I think the Biden administration needs to conduct a serious soul searching to figure out with consistency what their policy is. There's some good aspects, there's some bad aspects. The outcome is ugly because
Let's talk about some of the aspects that they better be focused on. And there is underway, as you know, Eli Ratner, a special assistant to the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is supposedly presiding over this review of China policy, strategy, positioning, and so on. Talk, John, if you would, first and foremost about the military capabilities that the Chinese are building, and how formidable do you think they are likely to prove to be as a threat to the armed forces of the United States and the free world more generally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a key pacing indicator, pacing is a key term in military planning, is their generation of the, I think there are 3 or 4, it's Type 75 large deck amphibs, essentially equivalent to our LHAs, LHDs.
These are amphibious ships that are used to project power.
Absolutely. And these are what we would call large flat deck amphibs that are essentially are medium-sized aircraft carriers. And the Chinese have about 3 to 4 ready. And then when mated with 2, 3, 4 large landing ships, now you have the capability to essentially land a brigade-size element. So potentially they could land 3 to 4 brigades. They've never done this before. I surmise perhaps a dry run somewhere first, and I don't. The obvious.
Perhaps these islands controlled by Taiwan, but not the main island of Taiwan itself.
Exactly. Well, Quemoy and Matsu are always what we think would be the obvious choice. I would suggest it would actually be separate. There's actually smaller Taiwan-controlled islands in the South China Sea that often people forget about that essentially are lightly guarded at best. And because right now, the PLA planning staff they read, understand everything we put out, and they realize they have not generated and projected amphibious capability under stress ever, and they're smart enough to recommend to the chairman dry run first.
So we may see the accumulated forces of the People's Liberation Army, which are now surpassing ours in quantity in the Western Pacific for sure, and by some estimates, much of it maybe even qualitatively comparable or superior to our forces there. John, in addition, one of your areas of expertise is cyber warfare. Talk about what the Chinese have been doing to both build up their capabilities in that domain and exercise them, including against us.
Yeah, the 3 and 4 PLA, which is essentially their cyber command equivalents, have been really doing operational preparation of the environment. Again, a very key term. This is just not. This is very significant terminology. They have no question been conducting operational preparation of the battlefield in advance of major conflict.
So let's put that in layman's terms. You're saying they are doing dress rehearsals or dry runs for the kinds of operations they would use against us and others in support of future military conflict. Is that right?
Absolutely. Just as Russia used Estonia and Georgia as both cyber in Estonia only, but then cyber plus kinetics in Georgia, China is likely going to go through dry runs of this. With cyber, they have definitely been conducting dry runs. Were they involved in solar winds? Unclear. Were they involved in Texas? Unclear. But there's open source information going back almost over 10 years that the Chinese have been inside of essentially our energy grid and infrastructure. And maybe
by some estimates, they've got 200 to 300 high voltage transformers there, and obviously those are cyber targets if they've equipped them for backdoors and that sort of thing to take down part of, if not much of our grid. John, let me just ask you quickly about one other piece of the Chinese order of battle. Their so-called United Front Work Department. What is it, and what have you seen, including in this most recent presidential election in this country, that suggests that they are operating inside our wire, big time?
Yeah, this is the civil-military fusion aspect of their strategic effort to retire us peacefully or otherwise. And a significant part of this are foreign influence operations. And in the United States, that is affecting the domestic environment, spreading hate and discontent among ourselves through social media, active work in our elections in Virginia. We've had a personality named Steve McClure, who has essentially was the lead starting in 2008 of Turn Virginia Blue. He has, he was active in the pro-Mao Revolutionary Student Brigade in the 70s. He has very close ties to Freedom Road. Trevor Loudon has very well documented him, but they are very active. It's been documented, all the ballots flown into out of Korea, curiously, to give a little bit of distance, but flown from Korea, Seattle to Phoenix Sky Harbor. Ballots, which was a key part of essentially the muddying up during. You could call it fraud, but then some of these state laws are so vague, and in Virginia there are zero control measures to authenticate the validity of a ballot brought in through mail-in, drop-off, otherwise.
That unfortunately doesn't alter the fact that it's still fraud when it happens. It's just that we've left ourselves open to it in ways that are frankly scandalous. John Mills, we have to let you go. It sounds like you've got to take a call. Thank you for joining us today and for your great service to our country, both in uniform and in the civilian side of DOD, as well as, of course, the work you're doing now at the Committee on the Present Danger China, among other places. Come back to us again soon. I know we'll be talking with you in the course of the day today for Securing America, our television program as well, and we appreciate you doing so. Talk to you there and soon, and I hope to talk to the rest of you again tomorrow. Same time, same station. Until then, this is Frank Gaffney. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.